Azek grinned. There hadn't been anywhere near enough haggling for him, but it would appear he was going to be going home, with potentially enough collateral and clout to be able to possibly add another ship to his trade route. He might even become a convoy master from this. The twin ends of his tail danced around each other as he strode confidently back towards his ship. He flicked up a communication line to the bridge of the Glorious Endeavor to order the generation of a bog-standard mercenary contract in Harchan-type print. Garash had offered to have one generated himself, but Azek reassured him that no Zilpik would sign anything produced by another species, so if this offer was to appear realistically negotiated, it would have to be from his side. The blinking communication symbol vanished, and was replaced by Syl. Hi, trader. What's going on? I assume it's not bad news as you're contacting me?
Indeed, Syl. We all might be in for a significant bonus when we return home. Quite frankly, I can't wait to get all this back to the Trade Council territory. This will make my career, Syl, and possibly the entire cruise. You're not going to believe the story the Harchan commander here just told me.
Well, glad to hear it, High Trader. Good news from me as well. The pod turned back on automatically. Must be the emergency crash protocol. It's not fully charged for a jump, but when it's done, should we pull it back?
Azil paused. Garash had expressly warned him about the salvation pod. It would be a good idea to get it back on board as soon as possible. Also, salvation pods were expensive, and he didn't want the dockmaster to charge him an essential replacement part duty when he got back to a friendly space dock.
And go ahead, Syl. Set it to automatically do the jump once it's charged.
Upon arriving back on the Glorious Endeavor, Azek changed out of his formal garb and sent Jek off to store Azek's armor in his cabin. Then go to the medbay to receive a pacifier injection to deal with the vast amount of stress Azek could smell pouring off the Zilpik. Entering the bridge, he could see that at his console the default contract for mercenary work was already there, waiting for him. Perfect. A good tell, about 15 hours, inserting trick clauses and bonus conditions into a contract was an ideal way to relax and flick his tail to the Trade Council about how skilled a negotiator he was, even if the contract would never be signed, and had never been negotiated. He'd have to include it in his report if it was to be realistic. He commanded the ship's chef to bring him some braised blade worms, served atop a bed of ragged. He considered sending someone to his quarters to get the rather fine container of jazz inhalers he had, but decided against it. It was never a good idea to indulge in luxury when only the bridge crew could see it. After all, some of them could afford jazz for casual use on the pay he gave them, so the effect of showing his wealth would be lost on them, and whatever crew member he sent might decide to help themselves to his supply. After the food arrived, was eaten, and the platter returned to the chef, he checked the ship's chrono. Nearly a tell and a half had passed. Shaking his head, he realized he needed some sleep. Oh well. Once he had Garash sign the initial engagement terms, typically signed before any negotiation began, he could sleep through their transit out to the system edge. A blinking light came up on Syl's console. The scanner's officer was already responding when he noted Azek's interest.
The pod is charged, High Trader. Beginning recall process now.
And go ahead, Syl, and order the crew to prepare for transit to the system's edge.
Yes, High Trader.
The scanner officer pressed the recall order to the pod, before sending out the order for the crew to prepare the ship for transit and undocking. In his haste to follow Azek's orders, he failed to register the increase in weight of about 60 fall, about 1.6 tons, on the pod as it returned. Captain Daniel Stansted Bridges heard a firm slamming sound, then felt a jerk like a second row had just picked him up from a ruck by the shorts and dumped him a meter away. Around him, he could see the Gurkhas he was with having a similar reaction, several stumbling and looking shocked. They'd been investigating the pod for nearly a full day, having reached it shortly after 2 Roach infantry, who had been neatly dispatched by the squad's sharpshooter Devi, also called a devil by Daniel, whenever the man appeared next to him without warning. The man was short, even for a Gurkha, and while he had been able to persuade all but 2 of the men to leave their World War II-era weapons at the village, replacing them with stolen bolt accelerators, He had been unable to persuade Devi to give up his Lee Enfield 4. The man had sworn it would work better than anything Daniel could provide from his, admittedly small supply on the Vigilant. The clean holes punched in the roach's maws attested to this. Handing the bolt accelerators to the two sergeants as backup weapons for their Brens, they had set up a camp around the pod, before feeling rather foolish when one of them had gone to touch it and the pod had opened, revealing just enough room for all 21 of them to crowd in. It was a little cramped, but Daniel had found something he thought was a control panel. It had lit up and shown several blinking symbols he'd never seen before, and what looked like a circle of dots slowly filling up. Pressing the console had yielded nothing at all, so he'd ordered the Gurkhas to search the pod and make their camp more secure, until a boffin could be brought over to investigate the find. The next morning, when the circle had filled, the Gurkhas had crowded in again to see what would happen when their affectionately named Madman officer began pressing buttons again, and now they were very clearly trapped in the pod. The door was closed. Padam, one of the sergeants, pushed against where the door had been, and Daniel was delighted to see it open, only to be slightly surprised to not see the cold Himalayan mountainside outside the door. Outside was a clean, bright room, with what looked like some sort of long teardrop-shaped object, similar in construction to the pod, only far larger, standing on double-jointed legs that clearly folded into the main shape, given the obvious gaps in its main body.
परिधि सुरक्षित गर्नुहोस् 10 जनाको 2 टोली
Secure the perimeter. 2 teams of 10. Daniel snapped out, drawing the bolt accelerator pistol he had taken from what he assumed was a Roach officer. The Gurkhas boiled out of the pod, guns swinging up as they emerged, moving in perfect coordination. While the official selection hadn't occurred due to Earth's unwelcome guests, he had been assured by the village elders that these were the finest men of the current crop. 8 of his men were full Gurkhas, at least by training, having learned passable English, and seen action in the hit-and-run battles in the subcontinent against the Roaches. The others were green, but only as green as a man who had been training his whole life to become an elite soldier. Daniel would take them over a whole platoon of U.S. Marines, or Royal Marine Commandos, if such a group could be put together in the weird war humanity found itself fighting. The U.S. had been hit particularly hard in the beginning of the war, their military installations being targeted by the death rays, and most of the U.S. military had taken the brunt of the Roach counterattack. He had heard there was a wing of F-22 pilots out there who claimed to still be operating, and had claimed to have shot down some of the Roach craft, but there was no way of confirming it. He followed his men out of the pod, and moved rapidly towards what was clearly a door, out of what looked like some sort of cargo or storage bay, if the large crates clamped floor to ceiling were anything to go by. When he fell in behind the Gurkhas, they pressed a blue panel next to the door, and it hissed open. Cargo Master Atris was very annoyed. Not only had she had to restack and disorder her entire cargo bay at the last trade post to make room for some ridiculous pleasure shuttle the High Trader had purchased, she then had to do it again to make room for an emergency recall of a salvation pod, and from what her alerts on her collar were telling her, some idiot members of the crew had snuck in, undoubtedly to see if the High Trader had stashed any goodies in his new pleasure shuttle. Of course he hadn't. She'd have found them if he had, and then sold them to the crew at a high markup. As she approached, her frill high and blue, she watched, tail lashing in annoyance as the cargo bay door opened. She opened her mouth to begin a torrent of abuse, only to find her words dying in her dewlap as she found herself looking at a heavy tube of metal with a curving metal block on top, being wielded by some sort of dark, bipedal, hairless creature, shorter than her, but very heavy set. Many more soon boiled out of the cargo bay, holding coil guns. As her frill began to raise and lower in panic, she felt something press down on her tail. Screaming in fear, she dropped to the ground, curling up into a ball.
तमार तिमी मूर्ख तिमी गोर्खा हो कि मातेको हात्ती get off the booster.
Tamar, you fool! Are you a Gurkha or a drunken elephant? Get off the tail! The one in front of her said, her collar flashing up the signal for an unrecognized language. Desperately, she prodded the emergency alert, praying that the High Trader would be able to negotiate her way free of this nightmare.